I would like to begin with a question. How feminine are you? If everybody has their own unique blend of masculine and feminine energy, how strong would you say your sense of feminine energy is? How does the idea of being feminine make you feel? For some, you may be quite adverse to the idea of having any sense of feminine energy whatsoever. And for you, I'd like to question, why do you think that is? For others, you may have fully embraced the idea of having feminine energy in abundance. And for you, I'd like to question, why do you think that is? I'm going to introduce you to an idea to shift the way that we as a society perceive feminine energy and the traits which are characteristically and stereotypically associated with the feminine. In an age full of division and conflict, and as we, the human race, fight for ego-driven authority, power, status, financial gain, the need to win and the need to be right, we are in an existential crisis in desperate need of a positive disruption and a challenge to the way of thinking which we are all encouraged to believe as necessary and required for our existence. I, Victoria, as a multinational titled UK fitness champion, former champion in athletics, stunt cheerleader, yoga teacher, mindfulness and meditation teacher, personal trainer, coach, psychology graduate, retail and business graduate, and successfully eclectic entrepreneur, I'm here to offer an idea from my heart and from my belief in our ability to unite to secure a better future. As a woman passionate about encouraging other women to celebrate and realise their brilliance, I've had anything but a straightforward life living as a woman in 2021. I have endometriosis, ME, previously a condition called vulvodynia, and I've had more abnormal cells than I can remember to count. I've previously been in an abusive gaslighting relationship, and I've also been sexually harassed by a male member within a superior position within my place of work on more than one occasion. I've also previously experienced having an eating disorder, and I've also had to say goodbye to 3 babies. I know what having a diminished sense of any sort of energy can feel like, but I also know the value and the impact that feminine energy can have, not just on myself, but also on everybody around me as well as on my community. And I truly believe in the power of feminine energy, and not just to benefit girls and women, but also boys, men, and the planet itself. We are detrimentally impacting ourselves as well as the beautiful planet we so luckily get to call our home through the suppression and the subjugation of the feminine. It is no secret that the feminine, traits associated with the feminine, are and have been suppressed for an exceptionally long time. Traits which are often considered as downgrades to the toxically masculine traits which we currently raise our children to have as being ideal. Now, please note that by toxically masculine, I am by no means insinuating boys and men, but reiterating and highlighting toxically masculine traits which we all possess. But what if traits such as softness, creativity, connection and collaboration, empathy, compassion, intuition, acceptance, to nurture and to be forgiving, traits which today I'm going to share with you as my divine 9, were the traits which we actually valued the most. So traits associated with the feminine that I truly believe could help us to heal the relationships we have with ourselves, with each other, as well as with the planet itself. Number 1, softness. Through invoking a greater sense of softness, could we prevent more male suicides? 3 times as many men die from suicide as do women, and I truly believe that this is partially as a result of men not feeling able to freely express, regulate, and understand their very normal human emotions, their very normal sense of human feeling, through a fear of being incorrectly perceived or labelled as being weak. We need to normalise emotion, and we need to normalise feeling because they are normal parts of human experience. Through seeing softness as a strength and not as a weakness, could we save more men's lives? Let's invoke a greater sense of softness. Number 2, creativity. Through invoking a greater sense of creativity and celebrating all aspects of the creative and the arts industry, unfortunately diminished in this country over the last 18 months, as well as now being less prioritised within schools. But in doing so, could we increase levels of self-awareness, inspiration and imagination, which in turn would lead to better problem-solving abilities at the micro and the macro level? The irony is, if we valued such traits, we may have been able to implement more effective strategies when we needed to, when such as unprecedented pandemics hit us and impacted every single aspect of our lives. Let's value vision, ideas and growth. Let's invoke a greater sense of creativity. Number 3, connection and collaboration. Through invoking a greater sense of connection and valuing collaboration, seeing each and every other person as either our sister or as our brother, regardless of race, ethnicity, country of origin or religion, could we completely avoid international violence, conflict and war simply because we understand we're just one big connected family? Here's a little story about wild geese. Within a wild goose flock, as each bird flaps its wings, it creates an uplift for the bird that is following. By flying in a V-shape, the flock will add 71% greater flying range. The geese at the back will honk to the geese at the front as a form of motivation to keep up their speed. If a goose at the front gets tired, it will rotate to the back. Another goose will take its place and lead from the front. If a goose gets injured or sick, it will fall out of formation, but 2 geese will fall alongside as a form of protection. They'll either reconnect to their original flock or they'll migrate into an entirely different flock altogether. If geese understand connection, collaboration, the value of shared responsibility, group support, and to have the freedom to ease into an entirely different flock with no sense of hostility whatsoever, why haven't we? Let's build our bonds and work together. Let's invoke a greater sense of connection and collaboration. Number 4, empathy. Through invoking a greater sense of empathy, could we avoid division and passing on generational trauma? Earlier this year, it simply took 3 young black men, our 3 lions, to highlight just how little our society can value empathy. Raised as national treasures and worshipped, the pressure these young men faced and were brave enough to stand up and face all of their previous feats and achievements, completely diminished and completely forgotten within minutes, simply because they didn't put a spherical object into a rectangular hole. The backlash these 3 young men faced was heartbreaking. But the backlash that these 3 young men faced because of their race is devastating. With a greater sense of empathy, would we not hear the voices of one another so much more clearly? Meaning that every single person who is impacted within such as the Black Lives Matter movement isn't met with challenge, question, prejudice or hate, but instead meaning that those who are at the subject of discrimination are met with warmth, love, understanding and a want for equality by all. We really do need to have a much greater affinity with one another. Let's invoke a greater sense of empathy. Number 5, compassion. Through invoking a greater sense of compassion, could we reduce victim blame mentality towards harassed women and increase the awareness of the role that all in society have to play in protecting one another? By valuing compassion, would this mean women feel safer to simply exist within society, not intimidated by or vulnerable to the behaviour of others, even down to seemingly harmless catcalling, being wolf whistled at, being beeped at in the street, having abuse shouted at you, or being reduced down to labels simply based on the fact that you have a female anatomy? Why does it have to take a life? Why does it have to take Sarah Everard's life to reiterate that even whilst completing the simplest of daily tasks, walking home, that women often aren't and don't feel safe? But we often shift responsibility onto women, not to put themselves in positions of vulnerability, rather than addressing the who or the what is creating that sense of vulnerability in the first place. With a greater sense of compassion, would this mean that women do feel safer to walk home by themselves? That women feel safe to go for a run by themselves? Or would it mean that women don't have to pretend to be on their phones, constantly looking over their shoulder, or have to mentally strategize an escape route, or to have to feel their heart pounding as they simply approach a group of men whilst walking down the street? And meaning that the first question a woman is asked after a sexual assault incident is not, or ever, well, what was she wearing? At the very least, it is our duty to make one another feel safe and protected. Let's invoke a greater sense of compassion. Number 6, intuition. Through invoking a greater sense of intuition, could we better attend to vital cues our own bodies give us in an attempt to protect our health? We are destroying ourselves from the inside out through a lack of self-intuitive trust. But if we reconnected to our intuition, would this not give us a much greater standing in the obesity, sleep-deprived, and stress epidemics which we currently experience throughout the Western world? Our bodies tell us everything we need to know if we are just willing to listen. But we've become so disconnected from our intuition, we no longer pay attention to subtle whispers of warning. We now wait, if at all, until they become giant red flags of screaming danger. Intuition is not a superpower. It is an innate part of who we all are. We've just forgotten to trust and value its presence. So let's reconnect to our gut instincts. Let's prioritize our health and value our happiness. Let's invoke a greater sense of intuition. Number 7, acceptance. Through invoking a greater sense of acceptance, could we protect the levels of self-esteem, particularly amongst our younger people? Could we minimise mental health implications that are inflicted on us all by skewed standards, particularly of beauty and attractiveness? We live in an age of editing apps, filtering apps, airbrushing, unrealistic and non-existent standards. But in doing so, we are encouraging the children of today, as well as all adults, to believe that we're always falling short in some way, that we're just never quite good enough, and that we're never going to fit to this standard. Let's encourage the children of today to understand they are all already worthy, and they're all already beautiful. Let's invoke a greater sense of acceptance. Number 8, nurture. Through invoking a greater sense of nurture, could we come to prioritise the needs of the planet over our own and realise that we belong to the planet and Mother Nature, and she certainly does not belong to us? With our own greed of the need of the material and of power, we've been altering the fundamental systems that support life. Our ecosystems, our forests, and even down to the air that we breathe. But such alterations are amounting to a great global experiment with all living creatures as the unwitting subjects. We're in a relationship with the planet where we constantly take, but we do not reciprocate. And in doing so, we're actually detrimentally impacting ourselves. Over the last 50 years, synthetic chemicals have become so pervasive in our environment, it's actually quite difficult to identify an unaltered human physiology. Could we realise the impact that we are having and so give back in abundance to a planet that has already provided for us so greatly? Let's protect our planet. Let's invoke a greater sense of nurture. And finally, number 9, forgiveness. Through invoking a greater sense of forgiveness, could we come to realise that the previous 8 traits, which I've shared with you today, we've forgotten to value because they are intrinsically associated with the feminine that is and has been suppressed for an exceptionally long time, particularly by those in pursuit of maintaining control and power. Could we start here today? Start to invoke a greater sense of the feminine and begin with forgiveness. Forgiveness of ourselves and forgiveness of each other. And realise that we've possibly been misled for what's important in terms of what we value. Let's start to invoke a greater sense of the feminine and begin here today. Let's invoke a greater sense of forgiveness. There is the divinity, the strength, the brilliance of the masculinity and the femininity within us all. But it's time to have a shift in the status quo and have a rise in how we value the latter. If everybody has their own unique blend of masculine and feminine energy, how strong would you say your sense of feminine energy is? I'm going to end today by asking the exact same question that I started with. How feminine are you?